All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Let's pray Luther's morning prayer together. I thank you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have kept me this night from all harm and danger, and I pray that you would keep me this day also from sin and every evil, that all my doings in life may please you. For into your hands I commend myself, my body and soul and all things. Let your holy angel be with me, that the evil foe may have no power over me. Amen. Okay. All right, so we're going to finish the fifth commandment today and start the sixth. Before we do that, because I forgot to do it last week, so don't worry about last week, but from this past Sunday, anything from Sunday or the sermon or anything that you want to talk about, ask about. Unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. Great fun. It was a great text.
Well, again, not really directly related to your sermon, but you may occasionally see the little kids raise their hand. They did it last Sunday because our lesson coincides with his lesson. And it was, of course, we talked a lot about the fig tree and on their level, what it looked like back then, what a fig was, and tied it into the story of the fig tree. That was the part that we focused on more.
Not the tower falling and killing everybody or anything like that.
No, and not the Galatians, and that would be confusing. We talked about it from the Bible. But then we focused on that, and then I told them during the service, if they heard Pastor talking about the fig tree in the same lesson we just talked about, just to raise your hand up or down. And they all three of them did it. It was cute.
I thought maybe it was a Pentecostal moment going on or something. I didn't know.
And then I didn't realize you were going to say fig tree 2 or 3 times after that, so they goes there. Yeah.
Well, good. That's good.
Yeah, and we'll be doing that again, so be, give a little smile or whatever, be patient. It'll happen.
I guess that's better than when they're older, making them, do you ever have to do what were they called in confirmation? Sermon reviews? You have to do that? Where was the law? Where was the gospel? But I like that better. Fig tree. Yeah, we're in the fig tree. That's good. Good stuff. Yes. All right. Well, and I'll remind you that unless anybody has anything else from Sunday you want to talk about.
Tonight's a luau.
Yes, the luau.
Collar shirts and grass skirts. Well,
coconuts, perhaps.
Over your pants.
Yes.
I was just
Preferably.
telling Shannon I brought a pineapple lime jello, and I tried to make mandarin oranges on top look like Hawaii flowers.
Oh, that's cute.
So when you see it, think Hawaiian flowers. In my mind, that's what I was trying to do. Just saying.
There you go. So that's 5:30, and then Vespers at 6:30. So we'll get back to Vespers and back to our series on baptism. So you're getting catechesis from all corners, Bible study and church and everything.
Yeah.
So be good. All right. Well, and thank you again to anybody and everybody who helped, contributed toward Winkle. We had a good day yesterday. We had an improved crowd in terms of numbers, I would say. But yeah, it was all good. So now I fulfill my obligation for the year. I don't have to do it for another year. So, all right, fifth commandment. Let's do our recitation, and then everything here is just the material we didn't cover last time. What is the fifth commandment? Thou shalt not kill. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we may not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and befriend him in every bodily need. Okay, so I did we talked a lot last time about some of those hot button issues that do fall under wrongful killing, and in our modern parlance, what we call murder. So I think we made our point very well with all of that. So other things that fall under the fifth commandment, and you'll see that these things, when you're talking about specific sins, are violations of the fifth. Because, and we kind of hit on it last time, the prohibition against murder is not just the different ways in which you could wrongfully kill somebody. But you can see from like the positive. Remember, there's always the negative and the positive in Luther's explanation. There's what you should do and what you should not do. So under should not do, you may not hurt nor harm your neighbor in his body. So what you should do then, positively, you should help and befriend him in every bodily need. So that means when we omit to help and befriend him in every bodily need, then that is violating the fifth commandment, even if you don't put the gun to his head and pull the trigger. So we'll look at some of the different permutations of that. This is kind of a good example, the first one. Again, we've talked about how the explanation, synodical explanation, has been updated over the years. Some of that has had to do, like we've said, with sin is always sin, right? We've always been violating the Ten Commandments for as long as sin has been around. I think now we live in a culture that's become more sensitive and is not as squeamish about talking about some of those violations. So, for example, I would think, I'm not entirely positive, but I would imagine it's more our newer explanations of the Catechism that mention some of these things explicitly. And that's just the world we live in, which is too bad. But for example, so the quote from the bottom, acting violently or abusively toward a child or spouse. So what falls under the legal category of child or domestic abuse, which I remind you is like actually inflicting harm on somebody. The other one that it mentions is reckless and self-destructive behaviors. And that would include, it says, for example, substance abuse. Okay? And then, now this one we might want to talk about just a little bit. Not because we want to, but because we probably should. Hating, despising, or slandering other groups of people. Prejudice, racism, and so forth. Now, I don't know about you, but I really hate hearing about racism. Mostly because racist is a term that people use when they don't like you and they're losing an argument, okay? Yeah. So, now, that is not to say that actual racism does not exist. You actually probably know more about that than I do, just given your age and when you grew up, and maybe where you grew up too. I'll never forget. This is one of those cultural things, I guess. When I was a vicar, I was sitting there eating with somebody from church, and you remember I vicared here in Michigan, and a guy was a Vietnam veteran, and he says, there's still places in the United States where they, they're segregated. I said, really? Where? Where would that be? He said, when I was in South Carolina, they were still kicking black people out of bars. I said, what? And I said, when were you there? He's like, well, in the 60s, during Vietnam. And I was like, okay, well, having been from that part of the world, it doesn't happen anymore. Yes, Kay, go ahead.
Have you heard of the town Idlewild?
No, I have not.
It's up near Manistee.
Uh-huh.
Somebody rich from Chicago bought this property and built a town for black people.
Blacks only?
Yeah, black only.
When was this?
Oh, this must have been the 2030s. I don't know. I just got a book somebody gave me on Michigan, all these different things I should have brought it. But anyway, so all these famous people like Jerry Lewis, the black
Sammy Davis.
Sammy Davis.
Yeah.
All came to Iowa because they know that they would be people.
Wow, I'd like to read about that. I've never heard that. Yes, so having said that, one of the reasons we don't like to talk about racism is because while racism does exist, in our modern world, a lot of times for like political reasons, it's used as a cudgel against people. So anything you don't like becomes racist, and that's really, it's unfortunate because it diminishes the actual problem of racism, and it also, like, if you hear that enough, maybe that accusation's never been leveled against you. But if it is leveled against you, you kind of get a little callous to that kind of talk because it's just made up. Yeah, Jim, which is unfortunate.
Along with that, all right, I was a prison guard in the military. I was abrasive 24/7.
Oh yeah, you were.
Okay, I mean, it was during Martin Luther King's assassination, 85 to 90% black prisoners, all right? You got a job to do. I was a racist.
Right,
I
you
mean,
were
I was
a
a racist.
No, I know, yeah.
But we run into that down in Missouri, like somebody said 20, 30 years ago.
Oh.
Went into a restaurant down there. We had a black friend when we were in Our Savior of Flint,
Mhm.
and we took him down to get his bowl. We were going to eat. They said, they'll serve us, but they won't serve him.
Mm.
Yeah, well, they did serve him, all right?
Just
I was
outside?
Pretty good size.
Oh.
The guy that was with me was pretty good size.
Oh.
They did serve him,
Mhm.
all right? But what I was getting at is, to me, now this may not be totally true, but only bad people use that term racist.
These days, that seems to be true. Yeah.
Bad, I don't mean totally bad, but I mean, like you said, they use it as an excuse. They can't win an argument, so if you don't agree with them, you're the racist.
Mhm.
All right, that's not the way life works.
Right.
Okay.
And that's why I kind of, it's a modern word. You know, it's not like an ancient word, it's not a biblical word or anything. And sometimes you question the wisdom of its use. So, but I think, what shall we say? Prejudice is a good word. And I noticed, my grandmother, who I've mentioned before, she would talk about prejudice. Now, she was also from a generation that I think tended to be more what I would call racially conscious. And I'm not saying right or wrong or anything, but sometimes, have you ever known, maybe you've been this kind of person, that like if you refer to somebody, you're like, well, you know, my neighbor, you know, the black guy. It's description. We now live in a time where people are very, very sensitive to that. I mean, I guess you could say my neighbor, the white guy, but it'd be like, well, that's both of my neighbors, you know, if we live here. But it is important to like understand it in terms of prejudice, because people have become very sensitive to other things. Apparently, it's not socially acceptable to say there are certain commonalities among peoples. There are like distinct groups of people. It's been that way since Noah had 3 sons. It was his 3 sons that populated the world: Ham, Shem, Japheth. Those are all of the races of people, if you want to call it that. And race, though, has more than skin color to do with it. Culture plays a big part in somebody's racial identity. So in some sense, it's a social construct, because cultures develop differently. In another sense, the pigment of your skin is just something natural. But I think it's actually seldom the color or the shade of the skin that's caused conflicts in our society. I don't think that's typically what it is. Having said that, how it relates, though, to the 5th commandment. Yes, Dory. No, go ahead.
When I was growing up, people were very religious, prejudiced, like, okay, you're going to go with so-and-so, and what religion are they?
Yes.
You
yes.
know, I think you should not go with them. Or, you know, it was,
Yeah.
and of course it was Roman Catholic.
Right. Yes.
You
Yes.
know?
Right. Yeah, and that's. So we do make distinctions, don't we? Now, sometimes, we live in a time, again, where we're sensitive to race and prejudice and things like that. So, like, of course, not all discrimination is wrong. Like, discrimination is the art of making distinctions between people. Segregation is the same way. We segregate bathrooms, right? That's been a hot topic in the news, too. We discriminate between men and women. Like, that's a man, he goes in that one. That's a woman, she goes in that one. That is segregation and discrimination and things like that. Like any group that you would be a member of, if there's a ladies group, you are segregated from the men, right? Like Ladies Christian Fellowship and stuff like that. We discriminate in the church. Only men may hold the office of ministry and authority in a congregation, right? That's God's order. So, and then questions like that, which again, today, gosh, it's actually hard to find people who, well, I shouldn't say that. That wouldn't be fair. I was going to say it's hard to find people who teach their children you need to marry somebody of your same church. It's actually, maybe it's not that so much as it is, it's harder to find somebody of your same church to marry. Might be the more, I had to go 600 miles, to meet my wife.
My children mention that now.
Yes.
As they're older, I
I
wish
had to
I
trade
would
mine
have
in.
Yeah.
thought about that.
Right. I got a Lutheran wife because I went to seminary. My brother got a Lutheran wife because he converted her. That's just kind of that's one of the realities. So having said that, so there's like legitimate discrimination. Like nature itself discriminates. God made man and woman. Those are two different things. They're not the same thing. And this is where it goes to the fifth commandment. And I would tell you, I think this is the only acceptable use of the term racist. Is we are called to love our neighbor. And if there's something that you believe that will keep you from loving your neighbor, that has something to do with their race, their culture, how they look, then that is a sin. I think that's what the Good Samaritan teaches us, right? Now the Jews were right to be a little wary of the Samaritans because remember the Samaritans had descended from, Old Testament times. Remember when the Assyrians took the northern tribes into captivity, and then they committed what would be called cultural genocide. And they imported all these pagan people to mix with the population so they could destroy the ethnic identity of the Israelites. That was the beginning of the Samaritans. Now, the other problem with the Samaritans is that they develop false doctrines. So when Jesus meets the woman at the well, remember that woman is a Samaritan, and St. John says Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus deals with her, but they do talk theology. Because remember, the Samaritans had corrupted the Old Testament. They changed it, where it says that the temple is supposed to be on Mount Gerizim instead of Mount Zion. So, lo and behold, Mount Gerizim is a mountain in Samaria. So they were heretics. Like they had a theological problem. They didn't worship God the way that they were supposed to. So they were discriminating on some of those grounds as well. But what Jesus teaches us in the parable of the Good Samaritan is, remember the driving question is, and who is my neighbor? And we talked about who our neighbor is. Your neighbor is the person who lives within proximity to you. And he's not there, right, like we said, he's not there to shoot you or to harm you, but he's just there, So remember, the priest, who's a Jew, will not help the man who's fallen among the thieves. He passes him by. The Levite won't do it. It's only the Samaritan. And this man in the parable is a Jew because Jesus is telling the story.
Did he become a Samaritan because he helped, or was he a Samaritan? What does that mean?
He was just born a Samaritan because he was from northern Israel. So that region's called Samaria. But it's kind of like being called a Jew. It's ethnic and it is religious. For him, it is also religious. So he's the other. He is. I would not consider him my neighbor because I want to pass on not loving him. But so it's the Samaritan who teaches the true people of God how to be neighbors to other people. So that's why prejudice is a sin. Prejudice is a sin because if it keeps you from loving and serving other people who don't look like you, who are not your race or your culture, and it would say even your religion, right? He has a human need. He didn't stop like, let me check with you real quick. So do you believe God is worshipped on that mountain or my mountain? If you say wrong mountain, I'm going to leave you in the ditch, right? Right. It's because he's a man. He is your neighbor. So having said that, with the race thing, so that means it's not sin if you, I hate talking about this stuff. If you say, black people really seem to have like a little more rhythm than white people. Now that is considered a racist statement now. But it's true. Because it's not the color of their skin that makes them bouncy. Like, it's part of their culture. It's even true, like, if you go to Africa, and Caitlin and I knew some Africans, we knew them in the seminary, and they were solid Lutherans like you and me. In fact, they're probably more solid. And when I say they were solid, I mean they wanted to sing Lutheran hymns, they were liturgical, like their worship looked exactly the same, but they had a little more pep, in the step. If you say black people are better basketball players, that's now considered a racist statement, You remember the movie White Men Can't Jump? Or can't they? Yeah, okay. Apparently that's racist. So, but let's not be as silly for a minute. If you are more comfortable socially around people who look like you, it's not really a sin. Helena cries if you take her because you don't look like me or Caitlin. That's not a sin, right? That's just natural affection. And if you're, I've never been particularly physically attracted to ladies of darker skin. It's not a sin, So, we have, I'm only attracted to one woman, as you know. But I'm just saying, but when you're talking about preference, one of the things that we have lost in our culture has been, nobody's allowed to honestly say any of the things that I just said. But I can say them, or you can even say, and I know this is all recorded, so one day I'll get in trouble. But if you say, sometimes I just don't understand black folks, or maybe I don't understand Chinese folks, that's not a sin for me to say that. I'm not one of them, okay? That's not a problem unless it stops me from loving somebody else, or it makes me hate them, or I commit, I break the fifth commandment. Then that's a problem. But for me to say, this is who I am by nature, this is my culture, this is my background, and I don't have a problem with it, and I don't have a problem with other people having their own race, background, the way that
They don't understand. I think most people.
And they will never understand what it means to be white. That's right. That's fine. God made them all. Yeah, Jim. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Would you classify the media breaking the fifth commandment? The way they promote
when they incite violence,
the way they promote their racism and all this other stuff, make criminal of color heroes and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
I think they cause a great amount of dissension in this country.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I believe that it falls under this category
You're right.
of the Fifth Amendment.
Yes.
Or Fifth
Commandment. Yeah.
Fifth Commandment. All right,
Yeah.
I got it.
Yes, I agree with that. And it violates the eighth commandment as well, which says you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So when you lie, one sin leads to another sin. And it's certainly true that the way that media works is it incites virtually all of the bad things that happen now is incited by media, if not by government itself.
And if it isn't bad, okay, let's say it's a borderline, and you could be good or bad. They're going to make it.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this, but they bring up the bad side of whatever
exactly. Depending on the network, it'll tell you who's the villain, and all of that stuff.
And I just don't understand them doing, all the bad stuff.
Yeah. So I didn't think this would be controversial in this group, but some of those things I think should just be said. And I think older generations of people have been more racially conscious, but it was because they were allowed to speak about these things. We're not really allowed to talk about it anymore. Yeah.
Through the years, all right, I hate to say this, but if you look, okay, I grew up near Flint.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with people of color, yellow, black, green. It doesn't make any difference what color they were. All right? There's good people.
Aliens.
There's good people.
Half our church was black.
There's good
Yes.
people
Who say that?
on all sides.
Right.
All right? But the thing is that they take and just like the city of Flint, all right? People like to stay with their own group.
Which is not a sin.
And that's not just.
That's not a sin,
That's
yeah.
Flint's got Hungarian
Mhm.
side, the
Yep.
Polish side, German side, they congregate together. But when certain people move to a different section of town, it becomes just like the part of town that they got out of.
Right.
I mean, they, you know,
That's more a
that
matter
group
of
of
poverty,
people
which is mostly.
destroyed an environment by moving in there.
Right.
All right? I mean, they were beautiful homes, not $200,000, $300,000 homes, but nice homes.
Yeah,
And
talk
that
to
whole
me,
area
that one.
became a slum.
Right.
All right? And that happens in a lot of different places. Like I say, I grew up with them. Our church, our Savior, was a mixed congregation.
Yeah.
All right? The people that came there, most of them were not racially motivated. We had some that were, but you just made sure you stay away from certain. Sue, I didn't know she was there.
Yeah.
I know, I used
You
to
know,
clean
you
that
just stay
church
away
at
from-
night.
You just stay away from certain conversations.
Right.
All right?
Yeah. We like we do with any kind of person, you know.
Our children being raised with our children.
Yeah.
Jim and I. Our children being raised in the congregation that's black and white.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want.
Which sort of led me to what I was gonna say a minute ago about how I think if you deal with people individually, then they know, I'm saying they meaning African Americans, know it's okay to call them black because you're not meaning anything by them. I think sometimes it's when it gets to a bigger grouping, that's where then it turns to more racist, I guess you could
Yeah,
say.
and see, that's what it says here, right? Hating, despising, or slandering groups of people.
Yeah.
Like, to judge a group of people. Again, and we're saying judge not in the sense of being able to look at a group and say, Asians have really high IQs. Have you ever noticed that? They seem smarter than everybody else. That's apparently a racist statement now. But it's like, no, but I mean, it's an observable fact. It doesn't mean they are better than anybody else. It doesn't mean we hate them. So it's when it terminates in something like that. This is why people are not allowed socially to have these conversations anymore, because it takes a turn into something else. And we do live in a society now that is very... we're very envious, aren't we? So, why should it be any skin off my nose if Asian people are smarter than most white people? I'm happy with myself. Like, I don't really care, you know? Like, it doesn't matter. I also don't play basketball. If black folks are better playing basketball, I don't really care, you know? But if you decide you're going to care, then maybe that causes a conflict. I don't know.
You learn to read people. All right?
Yeah, the
I
person.
background is
Yeah.
prison guard. You learn to read people. You know which ones you have to watch out for and which ones you don't have to watch out for. And that goes for
All kinds of
all
people.
colors.
Yeah.
Okay? I've learned to read a lot of people just by their actions and sometimes by how they talk. I've learned to read them, you know, and I'm sure a lot of other people have.
Yeah.
But don't you think our society has become more offended by everybody anymore?
Yes, well, that's what I'm
We
saying.
grew up in a
Yeah.
family where we weren't prejudiced, we didn't notice that, we liked everybody, we weren't raised in a society that would be.
It's because
Even
everybody's
accepted
moving
today
away
because,
from Christianity,
you know.
from morality, from
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
commandments.
Yeah, that's
Everything
true.
offends everyone anymore.
Just-
The other thing that, oh, go ahead, Kay.
When I was in the choir in high school, there was one song we always sang was, they have to be carefully taught.
What does that mean?
The children
Oh.
are all, they don't know the difference between black
Right,
and white.
exactly.
Yeah.
They have to be carefully taught.
Yes, I've observed this in my own children. Caitlin and I have kind of like, we usually don't say if we're speaking of a person, we don't say that black person, right? But we've asked the kids before, we're like, what color is that person? And like sometimes it's like orange or red, and then you realize they're talking about the shirt.
yeah.
They're talking about the shirt. You know, sometimes they do make observations though. I think I might have told you every year we watch our wedding video. One of Caitlin's bridesmaids, so a lovely Lutheran girl who was from Kenya, very black, And so we were watching it, I think, last year, and Monica comes down the aisle, and Thomas goes, "She's really black," It was an observation, and we're like, "Yeah, isn't that great? Then that's how God, lovely skin color, Go ahead, go again. Yeah.
My oldest one, when he started kindergarten, because I had all the kids at home, I didn't go to the school, I sent him to the neighbors, so I never met his teacher. But my sister had told me that she was black. So one day I asked him what his teacher looked like, and he says, "She looks like you."
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you,
Of course she does.
He didn't,
Right.
yeah, he didn't.
Well, I'll tell you, years ago,
Amounts of babes.
in Bad Axe, I got a lot of family in Bad Axe.
Mhm.
Okay, you know Bad Axe.
Not a very black
Years ago, there was only one black person at the Air Force Base. Is gone now, over near Fort Austin. All right, and my cousins thought they were Indians. He was an Indian.
Right, yeah.
They didn't even know that was a black person.
Right. Yes, I know.
He was Indian.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. And I do want to say, and then we can move on. Obviously, we live in an integrated society and an integrated time and place. And we do also have to acknowledge, and Jim's kind of hit on it too, there are challenges that go along with that. Even in a place where like everybody, is officially equal under the law, and you've got some bad actors of all colors, all sides, and things like that. So you just have to acknowledge that sometimes. That sometimes you will. I know we're hypersensitive about offending, but sometimes you will maybe unintentionally offend somebody. It's part of living together. I mean, it's just how it is,
But as gayness becomes more and more apparent.
Right. Yes.
You
Well, that's not a
go
race,
up
but
against
yes.
it.
Yes.
I hate to say that, but it's very difficult
Yes.
when what your beliefs come
Mhm.
against what you are forced to really accept. And I'm coming across that quite a bit more and more as I see more and more people I wondered about but didn't think but are, and they're just coming up.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I mean, we're surrounded by all different kinds of people. It really is true. And so, we're going to sin against one another, and you just have to navigate that and be gracious. And this is the other thing Mary Lou mentioned. These problems have, in a way, become amped up in our own time as the influence of Christianity wanes in our society, which tells you something about what was it that can bind all different kinds of people together is the gospel. Right, is knowing that we're all created by God in His image and that Christ has died to redeem all of us. And this is the thing that conquered the pagan world, right? That it was the gospel itself that spreads by the proclamation, not by the sword. But you read the book of Revelation, and it's all tribes, tongues, languages, all nations. They're
All different, right?
But you ever notice in Revelation, they don't become one people. There's not one race, right? There's not like there's no more ethnic identity. There's no more culture. It doesn't say that. It says that they're all together, and the source of their unity, they're in harmony because they're all adoring the Lamb, who is Jesus. So the differences among people are not bad. But if a bunch of different people are going to live together, there's a lot of different things we have to navigate. And you also have to just come to terms with different people are different. And you have to be honest about that. And that's
that
okay.
might mean I'm going to become a gospel singer. I'll be right.
Well, there you go.
with
Yeah.
them that can
Yeah.
sing good.
That's right.
And I'll be able to.
It'll be interesting to see how it works out. How is it that they'll get the Africans, the Germans, the Polish, and everybody to sing in harmony? I think that'd be very interesting.
Well, you know what? I hate to say, but I think about this a lot when we're singing in church. Real quick, how God must really love Sunday morning when all around the world Christians are singing praises to God,
That's right.
And I think that must be a beautiful sound.
Yes, it is. A joyful noise. It's just got to be joyful. That's the... Yeah, one more thing, and then we're going to move on from racism.
Real quick.
Yeah.
The big misconception is that it isn't only white people that are racist.
Oh, yes,
are
yes,
racist.
yes, yes.
That's what the thing is preaching today.
Yeah.
It's just white people are racist.
Right.
Okay? And that is far from the truth.
Yeah, that is. Oh, you're going to get me on this, so I'm going to say it. So, the power always lies in who defines words. And this is why maybe it's helpful. I don't know that I like the explanation distinguishes racism and prejudice, but something that has happened now, the people in the movements that advocate this idea, that only whites can be racist, that's because they've redefined the term racist. It's no longer an attitude that you hold. There are structural things that can be racist. So they're saying that the entire American system is rigged so that black people or other people of color cannot be equal, cannot get ahead. They cannot earn, a decent, life and place in society. So yes, so when you redefine the word, then you're always going to lose. It means you're always going to be racist. And, the word that's thrown around now too is privilege. Like privilege is a bad word, but I seem to recall, maybe just in reading or something, but you ever heard like the Society for Underprivileged Children? You ever some people are underprivileged. It's because privilege is not a bad word. I feel, and maybe you feel this way too, I feel that I have been privileged to receive many advantages in life. Now, these folks want to say that my number one is that I'm a white male, and I'm straight. But I think I have a lot of advantages because I had a mother and father who were married, who were at home. My mom was at home. I was raised in church. My families both valued education. Both of my families, like down the lines, came out of poverty, and they, sent my mom to college. My dad went to college. My dad got his master's degree. So yes, I happily own, I have had a lot of privileges in life. And so I believe I should use any privilege that I have to help other people. But we don't deny those things, and you don't act like that's a dirty word, And then it also really doesn't acknowledge where we've come from either. Like, it seems to make light of like the actual like racial hostility and adversity and things like that have been part of like the American experience. To look at it now and say wanting like admission to a college to be merit-based is racist, and that it's rigged against people. It's like if you don't merit the position, you don't get the scholarship. This is how it is. So anyway. Go ahead, Judy. And then
I was just going to say, not to go down another trail, but try being a nurse in this day and age when you're taking care of a transgender person. Nurses have been fired, not by the organization, but by the patient because they don't use the correct pronouns.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, I feel like God knows when for example, if I put a catheter in a patient that's claiming to be a male and that patient was born a female, I know the difference between body parts.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, I feel like
don't confuse me with the facts, please.
Well, no, but God, no, I feel like sometimes when I go to work, I just have to pretend, and God knows I know the truth.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like, sometimes I think, I wonder if God thinks I'm sinning, but He knows I have a job to do.
You just love your neighbor the way that you do.
Yeah, and I just have to kind of go in
If he's a Jew or
and
Samaritan,
be very...
Yeah, that's all you can do.
That's all I can do. So it's like, oh...
You don't have to lie to yourself.
I'm getting embarrassed talking about
That's okay. That's all right. Nobody likes talking about this stuff.
No, but
all right.
It's challenging.
Yes,
More
yeah.
so in any other time in my whole career.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
God doesn't say that we have to go along with somebody's mental illness.
No, He doesn't.
Okay?
He doesn't.
God has created man and woman.
Mm-hmm.
All right? All through the Bible and through history has been man and woman.
Yeah.
You don't have to be nasty to them.
Right.
Okay, that isn't.
Exactly.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you don't have to support their mental illness.
No.
You know
And that's where I do think there's a connection between that issue and this kind of racial consciousness. And what I mean is, see, if we still had the cultural sensibility of being able to talk about things, then you could say whatever you wanted to without consequence, and they would also accept it too. You know, like, I can't think of a concrete example, but that has changed, and therefore you're asked to deny things in front of your face. It's similar. It's similar to saying, I have to deny what's in front of my face, that different people are different. Like, you're not allowed to say that. And now you can acknowledge, it's a man. It's a man. You know, like, no, you can't say that. You know, so,
Or like
yeah.
it's a born woman, and now they're identifying as a man, and they like Jane versus Joe.
Right.
In my mind, I'm always saying, I don't even ask like male, or I just say, what do you want me to call you?
Yeah, what's your name?
And I say, and I go in, Joe. In my mind, that's going through my mind.
Yeah.
Say Joe,
Mhm.
not, I mean,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to worry that, not.
I know.
It's like, oh my
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
But anyway.
You're supposed to love your neighbor,
Mhm.
but you don't have to like him.
That's right.
I
Yep.
mean, you don't hate them,
Yeah.
but you don't,
Right.
if you don't be around them, that's your choice. I don't think that's a sin.
And the thing is, yeah, we have to find, as we've said before, how do I actually love my neighbor? It can be sometimes, I don't want to sin against them. So the way to not sin against them is, I love you from over here. But then sometimes you might be in that Good Samaritan, but that's a different thing. Again, it depends on your vocation, right? Judy goes in, I gotta put in the catheter for the man? What? So you're like, how you doing? Do that, and then we're not going to talk about transgenderism.
Well, you
know,
did that quite
it's
well. Maybe we.
I'm a man of hidden talents.
You might be.
You
might be
all right.
better than you.
I think we've talked about that long enough.
You could get a day job at the house.
I'm too squeamish, I think. All right, so page 2. So I thought it was important for us to talk through that, and part of it is just so you know that you're not crazy, but the world is.
I just want to say, one thing I've learned, situations like that, I always have myself and another employee with me. I
Right.
always have just
Never be by yourself with crazy people, you know. So okay, so what some of this is getting to, and I wrote this out for you, that first bullet point on page 2. Murder is more than the external act of wrongful killing. It certainly is that. That's like where it peaks. Like, that's the most intense violation of the 5th commandment, if you wrongfully kill somebody. But it is like adultery, and we'll see this maybe today, I don't know. But all of the commandments really fundamentally are a matter of the heart. That means that they're more impossible to keep than first we thought, because I've never murdered anybody by like the literal legal definition of the term. But if it's true it's a matter of the heart, you can commit murder in the heart, you can commit adultery in the heart, then definitely we've all done it. And Jesus is the one who tells us that. He gives us that perspective.
Wi-Fi, is that on the news?
No, I've heard that before.
Three teenagers tried to kill their mom when she turned off the Wi-Fi.
Oh, no, I didn't hear that part. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh my
Yes,
God.
that would be, yes, that's the more coarse, is that what we call it? The more coarse
oh
form.
my God.
Three teenagers tried to kill their mom because she turned off their Wi-Fi.
There might be some, yeah, okay. No, I have not seen that.
That was on the
Jesus says, Matthew 5, you have heard that it was said to those of old, i.e., Old Testament, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. And of course that's true. But then he says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. The council, the original word there is Sanhedrin, but he means he's using the word to mean like judgment. You're liable to judgment, which he clarifies because then he says liable to hell. Now what that goes to show us then is that this is why we say it's not just killing somebody, but anything you would do, number one, to harm your neighbor in his body. Anything that embitters your neighbor's life anything that makes his life miserable, that is a violation of the fifth commandment. So if you do that to people, if you insult them, if you make their lives miserable, you are not contributing to their well-being. You are not making them happy to be alive. You're not helping them to thrive. You're not helping their lives to be sustained. So you are breaking the fifth commandment. It makes it a lot more harsh than it was simply, don't put a gun to somebody's head and shoot them, right?
What about your well-being? If you've got a neighbor that you don't get along with, it's better to stay away from him.
Yeah, but you can't go and antagonize him. You can't embitter his life. You can't pop his tires or, TP his house.
It isn't a sin to stay away from him.
There's no fun in that.
No, it's not a sin to stay away from him. But we just always have to acknowledge that there might be a time when I'm the priest walking on the road and he's lying in the ditch. That's the one thing that we have to say. We do have to say, according to my vocation, I might be called upon to love him in a hands-on kind of way. But I don't have to go to his cookout. I don't have to I don't have to send him a Christmas card. I don't have to do things like that. We can just be like, how you doing? He probably won't like that either, so just don't give him the, you're number one, man.
It's your activity, your inactivity.
Right.
A way to make things right or to
Exactly.
make things wrong.
And you figure out in life, there's some people, they're not going to accept anything you do. So the only thing that you then would owe them is like, if he crashes into a tree, you do need to go make sure he's okay. And he's going to try to sue you if you touch him. So don't touch him, I guess. Just get the cops on the phone, and then you've done what you're supposed to do.
And I think it's also kind of important to remember what you talked about when you talked about your neighbor and who that truly is.
Right.
Not that your neighbor is everybody that's there in the world.
Yeah.
Your neighbor is
Not if he's robbing you,
your
shooting
enemy
you.
in a
Yeah.
war
Yeah,
or
right.
Things like that.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's vocation is the key thing with all of that. So then Luther, I think he explains it well. That's from the Large Catechism. He says, in this commandment, God, like a kind father, steps in ahead of us, intervenes and wishes to have the quarrel settled so that no misfortune comes from it and no one destroys another person. So what he's saying is, yes, you cannot physically murder somebody, but God also, he forbids us to hate our neighbor or our enemy because he wants to head off the worst excesses of that murder that's happening in the heart, because eventually it can manifest itself in other things. So that's why anything, maybe we should put it this way, anything that could be a factor in contributing to somebody's murder, that's a violation of the commandment. So hating him in your heart, refusing to do good to him when he needs it, that sort of thing, that will lead to the violation of the commandment. And therefore, it's the same thing. It's just like with adultery that we'll maybe get to in a minute. It's not just being unfaithful to your lawfully wedded spouse. Anything that doesn't build up marriage, porn, lust, premarital sex, whatever it is, that is equal to committing adultery. You're committing adultery against if you're not your current, your future spouse. It's how we talk about with the kids in confirmation. So then Luther says, briefly, God would in this way protect, set free, and keep in peace everyone against the crime and violence of everyone else. He would have this commandment placed as a wall, fortress, and refuge around our neighbor so that we do not hurt or harm him in his body. That's what we want to ultimately prevent. So to ultimately prevent that, we have to make sure that we're not either neglecting our neighbor or harboring that kind of violence in our heart that would make us, attack him or break out against him or
I like the very
something.
end of that prayer of Jabez where it says, it's praying to God and saying, and keep me from all evil so that I may not cause harm.
Right.
And I kind of always like that ending because it points to the point. It gives you a little better understanding of evil and just, keep me from outside evil. It's
Right.
also so I don't create or
Right,
make
exactly.
evil or-
Yes, and that's the heart of the fifth commandment, for sure. So, I'll let you read the rest of that on your own time. This might be helpful just to think about. Bottom of page 3. I took this from that book that I mentioned to you. Where is it? The old Catechetical Helps. So I tried to replicate the way that it's printed in the book. the author says that there are three forms of murder. It's always important, like we said, to make distinctions. The first form of murder is, he calls it the coarse form, which is the gun to the head, right? Actually killing somebody with your hand. He gives the example, Cain, remember? Cain killed Abel, picked up the rod, brained him to death. That was murder, first one. David there, through others. Sorry, yeah, through others. David, remember, David does not directly kill Uriah the Hittite. He just tells his commander, who was it, Joab? Joab. He says, send him to the front line, and when he's at the front line, just tell everybody else to. So, he was responsible for his death. That was wrong. Therefore, David murdered Uriah because he wanted to get with Bathsheba. And then he gave him more examples. Herod murdered a lot of people. Paul, before he became a Christian. Judas murders Christ, right, by his betrayal. Through carelessness, self-suicide, including Saul kills himself, Judas commits suicide. So that, everybody agrees, that is murder or self-murder, right? The finer form is, as we've talked about, when you make life miserable for somebody else, if they regret living, if they don't like being alive, that is shortening or embittering their life. So Joseph's brothers, remember, it started in the heart. They were jealous of him. They did not like him. They hated him and resented him, and that led to, let's kill him. And the more sensible of them say, that might be a little far. Throw him in a pit. Throw him in a pit. And then they sell him into slavery. They made his life miserable. They murdered him. They violated the commandment. Hurt or harm or neighbor in the body, like Peter, bless his heart, when it cuts off Malchus's ear, right, in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's not improving his life. And you can say, well, he didn't kill him, right? It's just the ear. But it's like, yeah, he embittered his life. He made him miserable. It hurt really bad. He was deaf until Jesus healed the ear. So that's the finer form of murder. And then the finest form, and it might well be, we struggle with number two sometimes, when we resent somebody else. But the finest form is to neglect to help and befriend in bodily need. Priest and the Levite, like in the Good Samaritan. Hatred or envy. When you hate somebody, when you really hate them, you don't desire their good. You don't want anything good to happen to them. And so that means you're probably not praying for them. And so you're embittering yourself if you're not doing anything to them. So you're not seeing them the way God sees them. Then there was this quote. Who is this from? George Eliot? Yeah. George Eliot said, there are glances of hatred that stab and raise no cry of murder. Something to consider. Okay. Anything about that before we do this? All right, so that's all the negatives, what you shouldn't do. Yes, it is, isn't it? Envy is a hard one. Because, if you want exactly what somebody else has, you want their position, I guess that means you don't think they should have it. So their life should be worse. And it leads to the breaking of the fifth commandment, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. All right, so what you should do, though, help and befriend him in every bodily need. The great, I guess you could call the parable Jesus tells about the end times, the sheep and the goats. The goats have done none of these things. I was hungry, you didn't give me food. I was in prison, you didn't visit me. I was naked, you didn't clothe me. I was a stranger, you didn't welcome me. And they said, well, we never saw you in need. And Jesus says, as you did not do it to the least of these, my brothers, you didn't do it to me. And then the flip is true, right? The sheep have done all of these things because they've served Christ and their neighbor. So what that shows then is when they neglected to do the things they were supposed to do to help and support, then the judgment is rather harsh, isn't it? So they had violated the commandment. We've talked about the Good Samaritan. I want to talk about one more thing before we start the sixth, and that is defending our neighbor's life. And we touched on this last time. We talked about how it's not always wrong to kill, right? Killing is a consequence of living in a fallen world. Like there wouldn't be any killing if there wasn't any sin. So it's obviously not ideal. But God has given the authorities the right to bear the sword. He's vested it in the government, and the government then delegates that through their own branches, basically through the police and the military. So we've talked about that. That is not murder, right? That is God's way that he orders the world and he protects us. And that's something that I think is sometimes missed, is the government bears the sword not to give you an exception to the commandment, but the government bears the sword in order to uphold the fifth commandment. So, many times we use the term to be pro-life. We're talking specifically about abortion and euthanasia and things like that. But in a broad sense, the government's defense of you is a pro-life stance because you want the innocent to be protected. You want your life to flourish. And so the government would violate the fifth commandment if our military and police did not do their jobs and refused to use deadly force against people who would harm innocent people. So what that further means is, again, you have to look at things in terms of vocation. You have to look at things in terms of what actual responsibilities has God given you in life. We heard about St. Joseph, if you were here in church last Wednesday. Remember, Joseph is the husband and the father. So he is provider and protector. If he refuses to work and provide for Mary and Jesus and whatever stepchildren they had, he is violating the fifth commandment. If somebody breaks into the house in Nazareth, and Joseph goes, look, man, my son said turn the other cheek. Like, if you want to kill us, you can kill us. That'd be a violation of the fifth commandment. Joseph is tasked because he is the father. He is the house father. Like, everybody in the house is under his care. So he is obligated to use deadly force against anybody who would harm either his family or himself. And the reason that he's obligated to defend himself, number one, is because if Joseph dies, then they have lost God's means to provide for them. It does not mean, of course, that God can't provide for Mary and Jesus if Joseph dies. He does die eventually. But I have a responsibility to protect and provide and defend. So I have to keep my own life so that I can protect them. That's as basic as one can make self-defense. The other thing then that is wrapped up in that would be what? If God gives you the right to defend yourself, that means you have the right to bear arms. That is a divine right. That is not conferred by the government. Now, whether a civilian should have a bazooka, that's another kind of, well, you can debate that, the finer points of that. I think it would be cool. But no, you have to be able then to defend yourself against whatever weapon is brought against you. That's just the basic principle of the right to bear arms. Now, the thing that goes along with that makes us different as Christians from just like the basic American idea of the Second Amendment is if we use the term rights, there's something that you have to remember. And this is unlike the kind of American idea behind rights. The modern American idea. The modern American idea is I have these rights and therefore I can do whatever I want because I belong to myself. Okay, so that's wrong, right? The Scripture teaches us that we belong to God, like God is our Lord and Master. And so I don't own my life, but I do possess it because He's entrusted it to me. And it's not that I have rights so that I can just do whatever, smoke dope if you want to, kill your babies, abuse animals or something. You don't have an absolute right to do those things. But what we do actually have is we have duties. And if you look in the Catechism, I don't have mine right now, but that section, the table of duties, where it says what you owe according to your station in life. If you're a child, what you owe your parents. If you're a hearer, what you owe your preacher, so on and so forth. What you owe the government. We have the table of duties. The only way to do our duty in life is we have to have basic rights that are protected. So I have a right to self-defense because I have a duty as a husband, a father, as a citizen, and all of these things. So it's not a selfish thing. It's not like, I want to do what I want to do, and therefore I've got the right to do and say and whatever. Because we don't. Not according to God, right? That would be sin, if I just do whatever I want to do. but I do have duties. And as far as it depends on me, my life has to be protected so that I can be faithful in the other things. If I'm taken out of the world, God will sort that out. That's beyond me. But as long as I have anything to do with it, I have these rights so that I can protect the rights of other people. That's the Christian way of looking at it.
As I'll go back to my military again. I'm military police prison guard. I have been through many riots in that prison. All right? I've hit a lot of people. All right? My job was to restore order and also my self-defense. To me, I look at it as self-preservation. All right? When I was sent in to quell the riot, I did what I had to do to restore order.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that's against God.
No, not at all.
Okay?
No.
I didn't beat anybody that didn't need to be beat. I'll use that terminology. Okay? I didn't hit anybody that didn't need to be hit.
And you didn't shoot anybody.
Okay. And I didn't what?
Shoot anyone.
When I didn't shoot, I would have though if I'd have had to. That's part of, you know, that's all part of it. And I just say I think about that quite a bit. You know, and now you bring this up, you know, I did never do anything out of malice. All right? I didn't want to hit anybody or do whatever I had to do. I didn't want to do, that's not the way I was raised. But when I was ordered in to do something, then my self-defense falls in on that.
And the other thing with self-defense is, the other reason you can defend yourself is because your life is a gift from God. And only God may take it. So therefore, you have the right to do it because He gave it to you. It's not because it's yours, it's because it's God's that He put in you that's on loan to you. So, and again, I'm going to preserve my own self because I have other things I have to do. If you go down, right, it's even worse. We don't want like a prison break or something like that, you know, because we have to defend all our neighbors outside the walls of the prison. Right. And again, this is something it's surprising that many people no longer understand this. You know, that all kind of defense or use of deadly force has now become brutality. And it actually goes back to another commandment. Because remember, the commandment prior to the fifth is the fourth. And all of these movements about how police are all wicked and like military is all wicked, it all goes back to the breaking of the fourth. It is a dishonoring of father and mother because nobody wants to be told no about anything because they had no father and mother. Usually a father. They had no father and mother, and therefore I'm going to become father and mother, and I'm going to be the government, and I'm going to enact the law as I see fit. And they can never be told no. And so it's been the violation of that one that's led us. It's like dominoes. You break that one, and now we're breaking the fifth one, and then you're going to go down and down and down. And that is today's world in a nutshell. So, yes. Yeah, they do. It's all of one piece. It all works together. All right. Have a little bit of time. Yes, so just talked about self-defense. So we're not going to spend much time unless you want to. But that means that the government enacts other things that maybe you didn't know are so pro-life, but they are. Capital punishment is one of them. The government does have the right to legally take the lives of those who kill other people wrongfully. And the government also, as we've talked about before, they wage what is called just war. War is an evil, right? But it's not as bad as injustice, world domination by the Nazis, or something like that. Again, we're curbing the worst kind of behaviors, and it's therefore a good thing for us to defend our homes and our country and our way of life. Having said that, and the note here is helpful, right before we get to the sixth, and the explanation can only tell you so much, but it says Christians may in good conscience disagree about whether a particular war is just. You have to ask, what are the standards of justice? What makes a war just? In my lifetime, I've found that there's been a big deal. Now remember, I was 7 years old when 9/11 happened. I am a member of the last generation that can remember, I can actually appreciate what the world was like before September the 11th. Last one. This is how old we are, okay? My younger brother is, he's Generation Z. He doesn't remember a world before 9/11. A lot of discussion about the justness of what the American government did in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all of those things. Christians may disagree in good conscience about whether a particular war is just or not. Vietnam, for example, we may disagree about these things. We can talk about when may the United States intervene around the world? In what way? Can it be military? Can it be humanitarian? There's been a question recently. It's all about neighbor love. Should you be spending money in Afghanistan or Ukraine if we can't feed our own neighbors here? That's a fair question to ask.
And I have trouble with that, because we do have
Never
people
answered that
Yeah,
that are starving here, and we're,
it's a good question. Christians may in good conscience disagree about some of these things, whether a particular war is just. And then the other thing, they may also conscientiously disagree about whether capital punishment is always warranted or whether it is being administered in a just manner. So just because God allows it, it doesn't mean, you steal something, off with your head. Okay, I don't think that's proportional justice. It doesn't mean should every murderer be put to death? I don't know. But then the next question is, all right, so if he's going to be put to death, may we speak of the manner, right? Did you see that article about the guy? I forget he killed somebody, but he petitioned. He was on death row. He wanted to be killed by firing squad. Did you see that? Did he get what he wanted?
Yeah.
Okay, good for him.
you did what you wanted?
Yeah.
So they're good. So have they shot him, or that's still okay?
No, he's gone.
He's gone. Okay, I didn't read the article, but I saw it. Okay, so it's a fair question, right? And again, this is not the Bible, but our Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. So then we have to determine what is that. Okay, we don't really hang people anymore. People now think that's cruel. They apparently did not think that back in the day, right? The guillotine.
How would you classify collateral damage?
In terms of war?
In every war, you're gonna lose civilians. I
Yes.
don't care how you wanna look at
Right.
it, because, in the heat of battle,
Mhm.
or even bombs, you're gonna have collateral damage.
Right.
How is that looked upon?
Well, then that's one of those things that you have to really consider very carefully. And I do not want to speak outside my wheelhouse. I'm not military. I'm not a strategist.
Well,
So it's not.
it happens, and I think
Yes.
it's justifiable, okay, because now the enemy, most of them don't fight like a military, they fight
Right.
like guerrillas
Right.
in the cities and everything
Mhm.
else. So,
Yeah.
it's
I would.
hard to really look at.
I've actually gotten in trouble for commenting on that before, not here, but somewhere else, because I have my own opinions, but I don't know that I'm qualified to speak entirely to it. I can tell you
Pretty
personally.
certain in what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's fine, but I'm personally, I become uncomfortable with the idea of drone warfare, but I don't know that I can say, it's not for me to say
It don't
categorically.
have to be drones.
No,
It can be
no.
a rocket, it can be
Yeah.
a bazooka.
Right.
It can be a tow missile,
Right,
that's all
right.
shoulder.
I mean, even today, people of goodwill still debate the firebombing of Dresden in Germany and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think there should at least be a space to at least discuss that. That's all I can really, because I don't know. I wasn't there, and I wasn't in charge of those
Well, the
decisions.
object of war is to win it. You don't go to war with the attitude, I'm going to lose it.
Right, but war crimes aren't possible. That's the thing. Right, and that's what I mentioned. What I mentioned last time that people are always shocked to learn about is like what Sherman and Sheridan did in the American South. They raped, pillaged, murdered, plundered Southern civilians. They sold women into sex slavery. It was completely wrong.
But they
But-
went with the intent on doing that,
Yes,
all right?
they should have been prosecuted too.
So there's
They
a
should have all
difference
been
between having an intent.
I agree with you. Yes, that is true.
Civilian.
Because you can't always control these things. Like, I don't know where the rocket's going to land. I can shoot the munitions building.
I have
If
an
you were
idea
out walking the
where I
dog,
said it. Right.
I can't help it. I'm sorry.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It isn't a good thing, but nevertheless,
Yeah.
there is a consequence.
It does. You're right. Right. No, I agree with you on that. I agree. And we should be careful about it, I think. So, and then that's another matter of, so it's not my vocation. So the
No, I
people,
understand.
yeah, but I'm just
I
saying,
just
like,
wanted to
I
throw-
lay my head down on the pillow because I am not the general. I'm not the president. And so I just put it in the hands of God because I can't do anything else about
It's
it.
weighed on me being military
Mhm.
and, looking for justification, it's right on the borderline or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's very sticky issues a lot of the time. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, that's a good insight. Okay, anybody else? Sixth commandment. What is the sixth commandment? Thou shalt not commit adultery. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we may lead a chaste and decent life in word and deed, and each love and honor his spouse. Okay. So, we did talk a little bit when we introduced the small catechism about the sixth commandment. And we weren't teaching on it. I was just using it as an example. The thing to notice about Luther's explanation is this is one of the only ones. I think the first commandment is the other exception. But basically, other than that, it's the only commandment that doesn't give you the negatives. It doesn't give you the prohibitions. So, what I mean is, it doesn't say, we should fear and love God so that we do not do these following sexually impure things. A, B, C, D, E, right? I think that's very intentional on Luther's part. It is not because Luther is soft on what sexual sin is. It's because he's trying to uphold the sixth commandment. Luther is being modest. Years ago, I heard an interview on Issues, Etc., which is a Lutheran podcast, talk radio. And he was interviewing a pastor, and they're talking about the sixth commandment. And the guy kept saying that. And he intentionally did it throughout the whole interview. He never said the word sex. Now, he was not being a prude when he said that. He was making a point that you hear the word sex all the time. You turn on the TV, you see it on TV, you open up the paper, it's in the paper, you read some trashy romance novel, it's all over there. Like, sex is everywhere. The problem is not lack of knowing what sex is or hearing about sex. So he just kept saying that, and he did it for, this whole 15-minute interview. He was making a point. So Luther is making a point too. He's saying that, there are parameters, for that. Because the other thing is, remember, the small catechism is written for children, right? And so you don't want to corrupt the youth and put anything else in their head that wasn't there before, right? My children all know the sixth commandment. They don't know the explanation yet. But how do I explain it? It's exactly what Luther says. So we should lead a chaste and decent life in what we say and do. And husband and wife love and honor each other. That's the main thing that they need to know right now about how does one uphold this commandment. We, in fact, had a professor in seminary who he favored the old translation because it says chaste and decent. Because he didn't feel, remember that, he didn't feel that his children, when they were young, that they needed to know the word or the phrase sexually pure. He said, just teach them chaste and decent. They're going to hear the word sex all of their lives, for the rest of their lives. Everybody just talks about sex, sex, sex. So he's like, at 5 years old, I don't find that to be appropriate. So that's an upholding of the sixth commandment. just say chaste and decent, and they'll learn as we go what that is. Now, having said that, we do live in a very immodest time. And that, by the way, is not an excuse, right? That's not an excuse for, well, eventually they'll hear it in school, so it doesn't matter, if they hear you say it or they see it on TV or whatever, that's not an excuse. We do live in an immodest time, and the point that I made before about what's now included in the synodical explanation is that it has been forced upon us now because our culture and our society has changed. So now you can't just leave things to be assumed. Not if you go to school and like your buddy's parents are transgendered or whatever else, or all this other witches brew of stuff that we deal with every day of our lives. So now you can't leave them in the dark. So then some of that is left to, all right, so the parents' best wisdom and working together as they learn in church and catechism and all of that, eventually they're going to have to talk about some specific things. But the best thing in our daily life is not to fixate on the specifics, but what is the positive of the commandment? That husband and wife love and honor each other. So what is it that builds toward that? What's the foundation of that? And what is it, anything that detracts from that or undermines that or compromises that, that's a violation of the sixth commandment. Any remarks or questions about that? Okay. Now, you'll notice looking at the commandment that what it literally says is it literally refers to adultery, which is sexual unfaithfulness in a marriage relationship. But as we just said, anything that mitigates against that is the same thing as adultery, right? And I gave you some things from the Large Catechism. This is a good point. Luther, when he introduces it, he says, the following commandments are easily understood. So it means what we've talked about before, specifically 4 and 5. They're easily understood from the explanation of the preceding. That's what I mean, from the preceding commandments. For they are all to show that we must avoid doing any kind of harm to our neighbor. Right, that's the second table, 4 through 10. But they are arranged in fine order. In the first place, they talk about our neighbor personally. So remember, the most fundamental way to love your neighbor is not to take his life. That's what he means, so you don't harm his person. So that's 5. And it's the underlined part. Then they proceed to talk about the person nearest him. So who is your closest neighbor after you grow up? Or the closest possession next after his body, namely his wife. She is one flesh and blood with him, so that we cannot inflict a higher injury upon him in any good that is his. Because they are one flesh. Your wife, or your husband, whatever, your spouse, is your neighbor. Or is you, I should say, because you're united together. The worst thing you could do to your neighbor, apart from murdering him, would be somehow harming or compromising his relationship with his flesh, with his wife. Okay? Therefore, it is clearly forbidden here to bring any disgrace upon our neighbor regarding his wife. So then Luther mentions what I just said. Literally speaking, the commandment really takes aim at adultery. And then he says later, but among us there is such a shameful mess and the very dregs of all vice and lewdness. Now that's a remarkable thing. He said that 500 years ago. It was bad then. It was like people are too lusty and sex obsessed in 1520, you know? So, sin does not change. Therefore, this commandment is directed against all kinds of unchastity, whatever it may be called. Not only is the outward act of adultery forbidden, but also every kind of cause, motive, and means of adultery. Therefore, the heart, the lips, and the whole body may be chaste and offer no opportunity, help, or persuasion toward inchastity. That's just the snowball effect, isn't it? Why do we not speak immodestly? It's because immodest speech leads to immodest actions. Where does the speech come from? It comes from the heart, right? It comes from seeing something, and instead of saying, uh-oh, naked person, let's run away, let's not look at it, that it leads to the temptation, leads to the lust. The lust manifests itself through the words, through the bodily actions, and then finally actually committing adultery in its full form. Remember, it's a matter of the heart. All of the commandments are a matter of the heart, that eventually they manifest themselves in the action. Because sin starts in the heart. It doesn't start with what you do. It starts with that defect that is in us because of our first parent's sin. The heart's bad, and that makes everything else bad. If the tree is bad, the fruit is bad. That's what Jesus says. Jesus also says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's just the basic rule of thumb for that. Okay. So, the positive, the exhortation, that we may live a chaste and decent life in word and deed. And as we said, so this is why there's no specific prohibitions, because they're positive things to do. So, we speak modestly, we dress modestly, we do modest things. And then, not in Luther's explanation, but we've looked at this before, and I want to do it now so we don't have to do it again, okay? So we don't have to talk about that anymore. We don't have to recite this. This is the synodical explanation. It's question 68, if you have a copy. How do we fear and love God in keeping the sixth commandment? So he says we fear and love God by living, number one, as men and women. So whatever you are, that's what you live as, all right? We got that taken care of. Who respect God's purposes for marriage. And we do so by the following. A, treating our bodies as holy, set apart for the purposes for which God created us, again, as male and female, and not as objects that serve our selfish desires. There would be a lot of mischief that would never have got started if we believed that our bodies were holy. And by holy, we don't mean we're morally perfect. We mean that our body was designed by God. God has ownership over the body, and he tells us what we may and may not do with it. Remember how we said these are all domino effects. When we either individually or corporately, collectively start to violate these things and trample them in the mud, do you see what it leads to? So if we believe that, if we believed, I'm speaking rhetorically, but if we believed that if we treated our bodies as holy and they were set apart for God's purposes and our bodies were not objects that served our selfish desires, we would not have faced a lot of the things we have now faced in our culture. Not just sexual stuff. So there would have been no sexual revolution, would have been no Woodstock, would have been no abortion, would have been no Planned Parenthood. Because those things are intimately connected. If I can do what I want with myself, with my own body, as long as it's consensual with the person I'm doing it with, and they're 18 or older, well then that means anything else that I could choose to do would be fine. Because now the rubric of what's right and wrong is my freedom to do it. Right? It's my rights, as we talked about. And so then that justifies everything that follows from that. Because then an unplanned pregnancy compromises my right and my ability to do with myself what I see fit. See how all of those things are connected? None of those things happened overnight. It's all connected together. Okay. Yes, 1 minute. Okay. So let's just do this real quick. Note, Luther would not have liked this, but it's 21st century now. Human beings often violate God's purposes for them, again, as male and female. This is how you know what's a sexual sin and what's not. Is this God's purpose for me as male or female? If it mitigates against that and marriage, then it's a sexual sin. This list, as bad as it is, I realized is not exhaustive. There are some things on here that they should have put on that they didn't. Masturbation's one of them. It's not on here. It says, this includes consensual sins. This is very important. Because we live in a time, again, as long as you consent to it and I consent to it, it's fine. Because our idol is freedom. That doesn't make it okay just because you consented to it. Consensual sins, such as fornication, so that's just good old-fashioned premarital sex. Pornography and homosexual behavior. It also includes, see, this is what the world emphasizes, if you're forced to do something that you shouldn't, or you don't want to do. And that is a sin. You shouldn't force anybody to do anything. But there are consensual sexual sins and coercive ones. Coercive sexual sins, such as rape, incest, sexual child abuse, and other sexual assaults. And he notes, which also violate the fifth commandment. And this is the nature of a lot of those of coercive sexual sins, is they are sins, they are sexual in nature, and that's horrible, but they are sins of violence. They are violations of the commandment not to murder because you are harming somebody physically, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and it's a power thing. Most rapists do not rape because they're lonely and they have nobody to love them. It's because they exert themselves over other people. It's absolute wickedness. So it's a violation of the fifth as much, if not more, than a violation of the sixth. Okay, B, speaking and acting to one another as male and female in ways that build up. This is what we should do, by the way. Rather than tear down. Again, not only sins of the body, but like crude talk, derogatory comments about appearances, or immodest dress. We're getting to that time of year. We're about to see everybody walking around in their underwear all the time. You can't go to Save-A-Lot without seeing somebody in like a tankini or whatever. And also pajamas. That seems to be a year-round vice now. But now we're getting to the time of year, the weather, you'll see everybody in their lingerie. And again, I don't think it's controversial in this group because nobody here is in her or his underwear. But so you do have a responsibility to not make other people stumble. This is, again, something that has been, people deny now. I am not saying if something bad happens to you, that is your fault. But I'm saying, think of it this way. We all know sexual assault is bad, right? Why do people think they have the right to sexually assault my eyes when I go out in public? I didn't want to see it. Whatever. I didn't ask to see it.
Like swear it in public.
Yeah, right.
You may have the right to say it in public, but don't I have the
Right,
right not to hear
exactly.
it in public?
You don't want to be objectified. Please, you have sexually assaulted my eyes, my mind, and my children too, who are not yet understand all of these things. But it's like, I didn't want them to see anybody else in their underwear. I don't like them to see me in my underwear.
Right.
Well, I'm in the bathroom like, get out, go away. Okay, it's just modesty. That doesn't usually work. But
You just say something about children seeing others.
yeah.
Okay, look at all these stars now, and I'm sorry.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's horrific.
And they're wearing clothes that aren't clothes. I mean, see through everything.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And they're in public in big places.
I know.
And children see this, and I just think you're doing them. You're messing with their heads.
We
don't want them
yes,
to do that.
we do know now. Maybe they didn't know in years past, but we do know now that the mind is a very malleable thing.
Right.
And the younger that you expose children to content that is sexually explicit, it's already warping the mind, even if they've never seen porn. Yeah, it definitely is that too. But I mean, it actually changes like the neurons and everything in the mind. It is literally perverting them before they know what it is that they're seeing. So on that happy note, because we're over, we'll stop right there. We'll talk more about the good stuff. We'll talk about marriage next time. That'll be good. All right. Thank you for being here today. We had a good crowd today, I thought. So, okay, let's close with prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your holy 10 commands that you give to us. We confess that there are many ways, bodily and spiritually, that we have violated these. We ask for your forgiveness and grace, and also for your renewal by your Holy Spirit, that we might obey you, that we might love our neighbor as you have called us to, and that this might be a reflection of our love for you and our trust in you. We pray that you would be with us this day and all of those things, that we would not hurt or harm our neighbor, but that we would help and support him, that we would honor him and his possessions, including his wife and his family. We pray that you would watch over and protect us, bring us back to worship you tonight together. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you.